When Millicent Gowan pushed Isolde Carver into the fountain at the Midsummer Ball, 43 guests were watching. 43 people in silk and candlelight, and not one of them reached out a hand. The water came up fast, cold, even in July, and deep enough that Isolde had to fight to find the stone bottom with her feet. When she surfaced and gasped, the laughter had already started. She could hear it through the ringing in her ears. Polite laughter, the kind that hides behind fans and gloved hands, but laughter all the same. She had worn a borrowed dress. Everyone there knew it. But when Isolde planted her feet on the fountain's base and began to stand, when she lifted her chin and pulled herself upright with the water still streaming off her hair, something happened at the edge of the terrace that nobody in the courtyard immediately noticed. An old woman in gray satin went perfectly still. Her wineglass stopped halfway to her lips. Her companion said something to her, and she did not hear it. Her eyes had found the brass compass hanging open at Isolde's throat. The compass Isolde always wore beneath her collar, always hidden, now wrenched loose by the fall and glinting in the torchlight for the first time in 10 years. The old woman's lips moved once. She said a single word, a name. Stanwick. No one in the county had spoken that name aloud in nearly 18 years. Isolde Carver had learned 3 rules in the 10 years, since she was 12 years old, and arrived at the Gowan household with 1 small trunk and no one in the world who particularly wanted her. Do not speak unless addressed. Do not stand where the family would have to see you. Be grateful. Always be grateful. She had been 12 when her father, Stephen Carver, brought her from the small settlement in Upper Canada, where she had been born, brought her across the Atlantic on a ship she barely remembered, sick with fever the whole crossing, and delivered her to the Gowans because he was already ill himself, and there was no one else. He had died 3 years later. She had not been permitted to attend the funeral. The journey was too costly, her aunt explained, and the child too young, and that was the end of it. The Gowans were not cruel in any dramatic way. They were simply consistent. Isolde mended Millicent's dresses and pressed her letters and brushed out her hair at night, and in return she ate at the kitchen table after the family had finished and slept in the small room off the linen closet that got no morning light. Her aunt called her the girl. Sir Halston Gowan called her nothing at all. Only Millicent called her by name, and only when she wanted something done. Isolde owned almost nothing. She had her father's old brass compass, engraved on the inside lid with a crest she had never been able to identify, a stylized letter S beneath a Fallon in flight, and she wore it on a cord under her collar, because the one time she had left it on her nightstand, it had disappeared for 2 days before she found it at the bottom of Millicent's wardrobe. After that, she kept it hidden. She had asked her aunt once what the crest meant. Her aunt's face had closed like a door. "Your mother's family," she said. "People who made very poor decisions. You should be grateful we don't speak of them." So Isolde stopped asking, but she never stopped thinking about it. The Gowans came to Hawthorne Park every summer because Sir Halston had business with the Warry estate, and because this summer in particular the business was of the matrimonial variety. Everyone in the county understood what was happening. Lord Ashton War, the young Marquess of War, needed a wife. The Gowans had a daughter. He had the title. They had the money. What could be more natural? Isolde was brought along to pin Millicent's hair and hold her wrap and fetch things when fetching was required. "Keep to the servants' corridor," her aunt told her in the carriage. "Do not look at anyone directly. Do not embarrass us." The grounds of Hawthorne Park were extraordinary. Old stone walls draped in climbing roses, a long reflecting pool lined with lanterns, and at the center of the main courtyard the famous rose fountain. It was carved from pale limestone and ringed by deep basins that caught the overflow. And people said the old Marchioness Dowager had designed it herself during the last years of her husband's life. Isolde found a corner near the stone balustrade and stayed there, invisible as always. She was reading the Latin carved into the edge of the stone, Sub sol nihil novi, when someone stopped nearby. "Nothing new under the sun," said a quiet voice. She looked up. The Marquess of War was watching her. He was taller than she had expected, and less polished. There was something worn about his face, something that looked like tiredness rather than boredom. She had heard he was cold. He didn't look cold. He looked like a man who had run out of things he wanted to say. "Ecclesiastes," she said, before she could stop herself. Something shifted in his expression, the particular look of a person surprised by something they didn't expect to find surprising. "My grandmother had it carved," he said. "She said she wanted guests to see it before they went inside and started talking about things that mattered." He paused. "Are you a guest?" "No, Your Grace." She glanced down. "I carry Miss Gowan's wrap." He was quiet for a moment. "Then you are exactly the person she meant it for," he said. And something about the way he said it was neither kind nor unkind, only honest, and Isolde's chest did something complicated that she chose not to examine. Across the courtyard, Millicent saw every second of it. An hour later she appeared at Isolde's elbow, slipping an arm through hers the way cousins do when they are pretending to be fond of each other. "Come with me," she said sweetly. "The air by the fountain is lovely at night." Isolde's stomach tightened. Millicent had not called her cousin in 3 years. They walked together along the edge of the courtyard, past the other guests, past the lanterns. Millicent leaned close, and her voice dropped to something that only Isolde could hear, and all the sweetness in it was gone. "Did you enjoy that?" she whispered. "Your little conversation with my Marquess." "Millicent, I only." "He looked at you." Her grip tightened on Isolde's arm. "I saw it. I am 3 weeks from an engagement, do you understand that? And you are nothing. You have always been nothing." "Some messes," she said, and her voice was almost gentle, "need to be washed away before a new life can begin." She shoved Isolde hard between the shoulders. To everyone watching from the terrace, it appeared to be a stumble, perhaps a playful stumble, a thing that could happen to anyone in the dark near water. The water came up fast, cold, shocking. Isolde's hand caught nothing but air on the way down. She heard the sound through the water, muffled, distant. It took her a moment to recognize it as laughter. When she broke the surface, the laughter grew clearer. She stood in the basin, waist deep, her hair plastered flat, her borrowed dress clinging like wet paper, and the water ran off her in cold streams, and 43 of the finest people in the county looked down from the terrace. "Oh, how dreadful!" Millicent cried, pitched perfectly for every ear present. She slipped. "The stones must be wet. Poor clumsy thing." Isolde did not cry. 10 years of swallowed words rose in her chest, and they did not become tears. They became something else, something quiet and patient and not even slightly done. She set her feet on the stone beneath her. She straightened her spine, and she began to walk out of that fountain, slowly, the way a person walks when they have decided they will not be running for the rest of their life. The laughter on the terrace faltered. Then it stopped. Something about the way she moved made it difficult to laugh. The fall had wrenched her collar open. The brass compass hung free at her throat, its lid pulled loose, the Stanwick crest visible for the first time in 10 years. The letter S, the falcon in flight, catching the torchlight as she walked. At the edge of the terrace, an old woman in gray satin had stopped breathing. Lady Barton, the Marchioness Dowager, was 74 years old, and had outlasted 2 husbands and 3 physicians, and had never in Isolde's hearing been described as anything but formidable. She set her wine-glass down very carefully on the balustrade, and then she crossed the terrace in long, deliberate strides, and walked straight to the edge of the fountain, and looked at Isolde. She looked at Isolde's face, the way you look at the painting you were certain you'd lost. "Child," she said. Her voice was not quite steady. "Where did you get that compass?" They took Isolde inside. A maid brought dry clothes and warm tea and was sent away, and the door to the sitting room closed. Lady Barton said nothing for a long moment. She only looked, the way someone looks when they are comparing a living face to one they have carried in memory for years, measuring the differences, grieving the time between. "You have her coloring," she finally said, "and his eyes. I should have known the moment I saw you on the grounds." "Whose coloring, Your Grace?" "Tell me your mother's name, child." "I don't know it," Isolde said. "Not truly. My aunt called her that woman from the colonies. I was told she was someone my family didn't speak of, that she had made a poor decision, and that I should be grateful no one held it against me." Her hands tightened around the teacup. "This compass is all I have from her. I've never been able to open it properly. The hinge sticks." Lady Barton held out her hand. Isolde gave her the compass. The old woman applied careful, even pressure to the lid, and it opened. Inside, engraved in careful script, "Toujours honnête," always honest. Lady Barton pressed her lips together for a moment. Then she said, "Allow me to tell you about a young woman named Stanwick." Stanwick had been by all accounts exceptional, stubborn and kind in equal measure, which was a dangerous combination in her world. Her father, Lord Godfrey Stanwick, had arranged a sensible marriage for her to a man of property and standing. Elowen had declined. She had fallen in love instead with a cartographer named Stephen Carver. No title, no money, and extraordinary Latin. When Lord Godfrey discovered the attachment, his response had been comprehensive. He cut his daughter off entirely. He refused her letters. He forbade her name in his house. Elowen and Stephen married quietly, with 2 witnesses, in a small church in the village of Thorncroft. They went to Canada, to Upper Canada, where Stephen had survey work and where, Lady Barton said with a brief, unguarded smile, Elowen had apparently found the landscape honestly enormous and refreshingly unimpressed with anyone's title. They had a daughter. Elowen fell ill in her daughter's 2nd year and did not recover. Stephen, grieving and himself unwell, brought the child back to England and placed her with the nearest Gowan relation before he, too, failed. "I did not know about you," Lady Barton said. Elowen's letters stopped when Lord Godfrey's solicitors began returning mine unopened. Eventually the word came that she had died abroad. I assumed the story was finished. I did not know there was a child. Isolde set her teacup down. The words were arranging themselves in her mind, in a shape she did not want to look at directly, but she looked anyway. "Lord Godfrey," she said, "when did he die?" 7 years ago. Lady Barton held her gaze. He did not change his heart before he went, but he could not change the law. His estate and the Stanwick fortune were placed in trust, naming one heir, the lawful child of Elowen Stanwick, to be found and identified. A pause. "You, Isolde, if the marriage can be proved, you inherit everything." The clock ticked. "I carry wraps," Isolde said. Her voice was remarkably steady. She was rather proud of it. "I mend hymns. I eat after the family is finished. I've done that for 10 years. Lady Barton said nothing to this, which was itself an answer, because the shape of it was already clear. If the heir was never found, the trust's management remained with whoever had been appointed to it. Someone had been collecting that income for 7 years. Someone had been holding Elowen Stanwick's daughter in a room with no morning light, quietly, patiently, waiting for her never to ask the right question. "Who manages the trust?" Isolde asked. "The man your grandfather appointed," Lady Barton said. a man whose business connections have required the goodwill of this county's estates for a great many years, a man very invested in ensuring his daughter makes a favorable match. Isolde thought of Sir Halston Gowan's careful hands, the way he had never once called her by name. "Of course," she said quietly. And in the corridor outside, very still against the wall, Sir Halston Gowan stood with his face the color of old chalk and listened to the sound of 18 years of careful work beginning to unravel through a closed door. He moved quickly. She would always give him that. By the time Isolde returned to the gathering, the narrative had already been arranged. Sir Halston stood near the fireplace, with the expression of a man performing painful duty, and when he spoke, his voice was measured and visibly sad. He had recognized, he said, the compass at the girl's throat. It was a piece reported missing from the Stanwick estate years ago. He had hoped perhaps it had been misplaced. He could no longer in good conscience pretend otherwise. Isolde's aunt pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. "We took this child in when no one else would," she said. "We gave her everything we could." She looked at Isolde with something that was almost sorrow. "I have never seen that compass in my life. The child came to us with almost nothing." The lie landed in the room like a stone into still water. Isolde looked at her aunt. She thought of the compass disappearing from her nightstand when she was 14 and reappearing in Millicent's wardrobe. She thought of her aunt knowing exactly where it had been. "That is not true," she said. The Marquess of War, who had been standing in the doorway for some time without anyone noticing, said, "No one sends for anyone without my word in this house." He walked in slowly, and his face was entirely unreadable, which Isolde had begun to understand was not the same thing as cold. He looked at her borrowed shawl, and her ruined hair, and her hands that were completely steady, because she had decided they would be. Then he looked at Sir Halston. "My grandmother's man of law will examine the compass in the morning," he said. "No further action tonight. The girl stays under this roof." "My lord," Sir Halston said softly, "consider your position." He smiled, and the smile had something underneath it. "Consider everything your family owes to mine." It was said quietly, in front of everyone, wrapped carefully in the language of concern. The whole room understood it perfectly. Because what everyone present knew, what no one said aloud in polite company, was that the old Marquess, Ashton's father, had died leaving debts large enough to swallow the estate, and the man who had quietly purchased every one of those debts over the years, who could call them all due with a single letter and leave Hawthorne Park an empty shell, was Sir Halston Gowan. The engagement to Millicent was not a love match, it was a ransom. What everyone knew, no one said. The Marquess's jaw set. He looked at Sir Halston for a long moment. "The compass stays with my grandmother," he said. "The girl stays in this house. Both things are true tonight. Learn to live with them." He turned and walked out, and Isolde saw, in the set of his shoulders, exactly what that had cost him. 3 days later, a small enamel brooch, one of Lady Barton's, very old, very valuable, was found missing. A search of the house turned it up in the wardrobe of the East Wing guest room where Isolde had been sleeping, wrapped in one of Isolde's own handkerchiefs. The word moved through the house, like fire through dry grass. Sir Halston expressed regret in the way he expressed everything, with magnificent, sorrowful composure. Out of respect for Lady Barton's evident fondness for the girl, no formal charges would be pursued. The girl would simply go, quietly, for everyone's good. He called it mercy. Isolde was given 2 hours to pack. She looked for the 2 people who might have stood in the way of it. Lady Barton had, the previous evening, turned her ankle badly on the stairs. A fall, the physician said, brought on by the night's upsets. Confined to bed, no visitors, and the Marquess was in the room. She found him with her eyes. but Sir Halston was saying something very quietly into his ear. And she watched Ashton's face go carefully, deliberately blank, and she understood what had been said without needing to hear it. His mother's house, his family's name, everything that was left. His mouth opened and closed. And that was the moment something in Isolde's chest broke, not from anger, but from clarity, which sometimes amounts to the same thing. She walked out through the kitchen entrance, a final small cruelty, the kind that costs nothing to deliver, and a cart was waiting in the lane. Behind her, through the tall windows of Hawthorne Park, the lights blazed warm and golden as if nothing in the world had changed. The village of Castleford was 9 miles from Hawthorne Park, and it might as well have been the moon. Isolde found work at a bakery on her second day, the baker's wife, Mrs. Sturridge, a woman around 60 with flour permanently in the creases of her hands, and no patience whatsoever for self-pity, looked her up and down and said, "You've got soft hands but honest eyes. 6 in the morning, 5 days a week. Room above the kitchen. Take it or leave it." Isolde took it. And so the woman who was, very possibly, the sole heir to the Stanwick fortune, spent her mornings weighing flour and her afternoons delivering bread to the farms outside the village. She kept a small tin box under the cot. Week by week, coin by coin, she put her wages into it. She had scratched a word on the lid with a nail. Ontario. Her mother had died there. She had been born there. Perhaps it was the right direction, after all. She heard about the wedding from coaching passengers who stopped for bread and stayed to talk. The Gowan girl and the Marquess. Such a brilliant match, they said. And the Marquess, here voices would drop slightly, as if sharing something almost scandalous. The Marquess had not been seen to smile in months. Rode out alone every morning at dawn, wore his face like a locked house. Well, a farm wife said one afternoon, tucking her loaves under her arm, "That's quality for you." Isolde went into the back room and pressed her hands flat on the cold stone table until she felt steady again. She was 3 weeks into her new life when Mrs. Sturridge set a bowl of soup in front of an elderly woman by the window and said, without particular ceremony, "My husband's aunt, Nell Sturridge, come down from the north for the season." The old woman was thin and upright, with the bearing of someone who had spent 50 years in good houses without losing herself in them. She was warming her hands around the bowl and did not look up until Isolde set a basket of bread on her table. Then she looked up. She went perfectly still. "Good Lord," said Nell Sturridge, "you have Eloin's eyes." The cottage was a mile outside the village, and neither of them was willing to wait for morning. "I was cook at Stanwick House for 12 years, Nell said, while the night air came in cold off the fields. "I knew your mother from when she was 17. I knew your father. I was not at the marriage itself. That was done quietly, but I was at the christening. I held you myself, and when your mother knew she was dying, she gave me a box." She paused on the dark lane and looked at Isolde directly. She said, "Nell, they will try to make my child nobody." She said the only thing they cannot take is what's written down in 2 places at once. "Keep it safe," she said, "until you can put it into her hands yourself." Inside the cottage, under a loose stone near the hearth, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with cord that had been retied many times over many years, was a flat wooden box. Isolde's hands were not entirely steady when she lifted the lid. On top, the marriage record from the church at Thorncroft, signed by the vicar and both witnesses, their names clear and legible. Beneath it, Isolde's baptismal certificate, naming both parents. Beneath that, a letter from Lord Godfrey Stanwick in his final year, stiff with the language of a man unaccustomed to apology, expressing something that was almost won. And beneath all of it, a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, written in a hand Isolde had never seen before and recognized instantly. Sir Halston Gowan's hand, addressed to her mother. She read them one by candlelight. The early ones were smooth, reasonable even. An offer of financial assistance in exchange for a simple signed declaration that no lawful marriage had taken place. For the child's sake, Mrs. Carver, a modest settled income is worth more to your daughter than a claim she can never prove. The later ones were not smooth. You are alone, and your father's estate passes through my management. No door in this country will open for you. I am offering you a resolution. There will not be another. And the last letter, very short, written 3 months before Elowen died. I understand your health is failing. I also understand you have been making inquiries regarding the Stanwick Trust and your daughter's standing. I would strongly advise you to direct your remaining energy toward quieter concerns. A dying woman should think of quieter things. Isolde set the last page down. Her hands were perfectly still now. He wrote it all himself, she said. He was so certain she was powerless that he put every word of it in ink. She looked at Nell Sturridge across the candle. The wedding is in 4 days. What followed required 3 days, a county magistrate, and a solicitor named Mr. Gareth Tully, who had served Lady Barton's household for 38 years and had never once trusted Sir Halston Gowan. It also required a discreet inquiry that located, in a village 9 miles east, a young housemaid who had been paid very well by Lady Millicent to move a certain enamel brooch from one room to another, and who, when offered protection in exchange for a statement, began to cry and could not be persuaded to stop for quite some time. Mr. Tully read the marriage record twice. He read Gowan's letters 3 times. He removed his spectacles, cleaned them with the edge of his waistcoat, and said, in the voice of a man who has been keeping his sharpest edge in reserve for exactly the right occasion, Miss Carver, I have been practicing law in this county for 38 years. In that time I have seen 2 cases that could end a man of standing beyond any recovery. You have come to me with the 3rd now. Sit down, eat something, and listen carefully, because we have almost no time. He had one more thing to tell her. The Marquess of War had come to him 10 days earlier, in secret. He had asked a single question: whether a betrothal agreement entered into under financial duress could be dissolved if the duress itself was shown to be fraudulent at its root. Mr. Tully had told him it could. The Marquess had said, then find me the proof. Find it before the 3rd Saturday of the month. He has been looking for you, Mr. Tully said. He sent riders south. Isolde looked at the candle for a moment. I went north, she said. The announcement of the formal engagement was to be made at the midsummer dinner at Hawthorne Park. 50 guests, the dining room at its most magnificent. Sir Halston at the head of the table in an excellent coat, gracious and expansive, the picture of a man at the height of everything. The servant's door at the far end of the room opened without a sound. Isolde walked through it in a plain dress, her father's compass open at her throat. Behind her walked Nell Sturridge, small and upright, and carrying nothing at all. Behind Nell walked Mr. Gareth Tully with a leather case, and behind Mr. Tully walked a county magistrate whose expression suggested he found none of this enjoyable and all of it entirely necessary. The whispers started at the far end of the table and moved inward like a tide. Sir Halston saw her. She watched the composure settle over his face with the speed of a man who had been quietly preparing for this possibility for years, because he had been, in every way that mattered, preparing since the day he first read Elowen Stanwick's marriage record and understood what it meant. Remove her, he said, and his voice was perfectly level. This woman was expelled from this estate for theft. She has no standing in this room. 2 footmen stepped forward. The woman, said Mr. Tully, walking past Isolde down the center of the room with the unhurried pace of someone who has outlasted everyone who ever underestimated him, is the lawful heir to the Stanwick estate. The magistrate and I will require 20 minutes of the room's attention, after which everyone present will have a great deal to discuss. 50 heads turned toward Sir Halston Gowan. He did not speak again, and in the silence that followed, Isolde heard, from somewhere behind her, from the direction she had entered, a sound she would not have said she recognized, a step. She would later understand she had been learning it for weeks in the great library of Hawthorne Park, out of all the footsteps in the house, without knowing she was doing it. The Marquess of War came to stand beside her. He said nothing. He simply stood there, close enough that his arm was nearly touching hers, and looked at Sir Halston across the length of the room, and his face was entirely calm in the way that very deep water is calm when there is nothing visible underneath but a great deal that is moving. "Ashton," Sir Halston said, "think very carefully. Think about what I hold." "I have been thinking about it," the Marquess said, "for 4 months. I have thought of almost nothing else." He paused. "Mr. Tully, please proceed." What followed, the county talked about for 30 years. Mr. Tully read the marriage record aloud in a dry, clear voice, with the tone of a man presenting an incontrovertible fact. He read the baptismal certificate. He read Lord Godfrey's letter of acknowledgement. He called Nell Sturridge by name, and the old woman stood in the middle of that candlelit room and confirmed, in a voice that trembled and did not break, that she had been present at Isolde Carver's christening, that she had carried the box for 19 years as she had sworn on a Bible to a dying woman, and that the contents were exactly as she had delivered them. Then Mr. Tully took Sir Halston Gowan's letters from the case and read them to the room, all of them. He read the smooth early offers. He read the threats. He read the last letter. A dying woman should think of quieter things, and the room made a sound at that, a low sound from 50 throats at once, and it was not a polite sound. Somewhere in the middle of the table, an elderly countess said quite clearly, "Monstrous." "These letters," Mr. Tully said, replacing his spectacles, "establish that Sir Halston Gowan has known of the lawful marriage and of the heir for at least 19 years, that the income of the Stanwick Trust has been converted to his own use with full knowledge of its unlawfulness, that the debts of the late Marquess of War, purchased with money that was never Sir Halston's to spend, were used as leverage to compel a betrothal agreement." He turned to the Marquess. "That agreement, in my professional opinion, is void, not merely broken, void as if it had never been signed." Millicent Gowan was in the room. She had been there the entire time, seated 2 places from the head of the table, in a gown the color of champagne, watching everything with an expression Isolde had never seen her face before. Not anger, not fear, but something closer to comprehension, the kind that arrives too late to be useful. She rose from her chair. She looked at Isolde, and her voice was quiet and careful and pitched, as always, for exactly the ears she intended. "You have what you came for," she said. "My father's letters, a handful of old certificates. I hope the 2 of you will be very satisfied with yourselves." She looked briefly at the Marquess. "She has the money now, my lord. Do see that you don't forget which came first." Then she walked out, straight-backed, without looking at anyone, and the door closed behind her. Isolde watched her go. She felt not the satisfaction she had imagined she would feel, but something quieter, a faint, tired recognition of what it is to spend your life as someone else's instrument and never once be offered a different role. Sir Halston was escorted from the property before the table was cleared. He did not look at Isolde as he passed. The trial was held in October. It was not long. Beautiful accounts, Mr. Tully noted in his opening remarks, do not survive contact with honest letters. These did not. Lady Barton recovered, slowly and then all at once, and then rather faster than was medically advisable. She had not, it emerged, been quite as confined or as quiet as anyone supposed. She had spent her weeks in bed writing, one careful line at a time with her right hand, building a testimony about a brooch and a housemaid and exactly what she had seen. She told Isolde, when Isolde came to sit with her in the afternoons, that apoplexy was extremely inconvenient, but did give a person time to think. The Stanwick estate passed, intact, to Isolde. Every debt of the War estate, purchased with stolen funds, was declared void. The Marquess of War was free of the debt, of the engagement, of the 2-year performance of a man who has accepted a life he did not choose. Isolde pensioned Nell Sturridge and gave her the small cottage she had been renting, plus a sum that made the old woman sit down on the garden bench and look at the sky for a long time without speaking. She wrote to Upper Canada, to the settlement where she had been born, to the church there that held her father's burial record, and asked for the documents to be formally entered into the Stanwick family archive. She visited the church at Thorncroft and sat for an hour in the pew where, the new vicar told her, her parents had stood on a cold November morning with 2 witnesses and made promises to each other in front of God and nobody important, and she sat there until she felt, for the first time in her memory, entirely unremarkable, in the very best way, as if this room had been expecting her for years and saw nothing surprising in her arrival at all. The Marquess found her in the Hawthorne Park Library 3 weeks after the trial, where she had gone to return a volume borrowed from a Lady Barton. He was there before her, standing at the window, and when she came in he turned, and she saw his face without the careful arrangement he usually maintained, and she thought he looked like a person who has been done pretending for a while now and is relieved to have put it down. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You owe me a room with better light," Isolde said. "You did what you could. I'm not interested in relitigating what you couldn't." She set the book on the table. "I am interested in several things you did do. You went to Tully before I walked into that room. You refused to issue any formal order against me when Gowan asked. And you stood beside me when it would have cost you something real." He was quiet for a moment. "Subsol nil novi," he said. She looked at him. "My grandmother put it there for a reason," he said. "I have been thinking about it. I have been thinking about a great many things since this autumn." He paused. "Mostly I have been thinking that I spent 4 months building walls and calling it composure, and the one honest thing anyone said to me before any of it started was spoken by a woman standing in my courtyard holding someone else's evening wrap." The room was very quiet. "The compass," he said. "Toujours honnête." "Always honest," Isolde said. "Yes." He looked at her, and his face was entirely open, which was the most startling thing she had ever seen him do. "I would like, if you are willing, to start from there." They married in December, at the church in Thorncroft, where her parents had married before her. Isolde wore a gown the color of winter cream, and at her throat the brass compass lay open, its inscription visible to anyone who cared to look. Nell Sturridge sat in the second pew and wept without embarrassment. Lady Barton sat in the first pew, upright and entirely terrifying, and when her grandson turned at the altar to watch his bride come down the aisle and forgot, completely, to look composed, the old woman made a small sound that the vicar tactfully declined to interpret. The Marquess's vow, when it came, was brief and entirely off the written page. "Toujours honnête," he said, and took her hands. "Whatever comes after this, that is what I can promise. I am not a man who finds words easy, but I find honest ones easier than the other kind." Isolde looked at him for a moment. "Then I promise you the same," she said. "And I promise you this as well. If anyone at any future dinner or ball or public occasion in this county asks me to carry their shawl, I intend to decline." Something moved across his face that was, unmistakably, a smile. "Noted," said the Marquess of War, entirely and permanently noted. Behind them, in the second pew, Nell Sturridge cried a little louder, and Lady Barton looked straight ahead with an expression that the vicar, wisely, did not attempt to read. The compass lay open at Isolde's throat through the whole of the ceremony, and the winter light through the old church windows found the engraved falcon in flight, and the letter S, and the words her mother had chosen for it, and they gleamed there quietly, in front of everyone who had once decided that Isolde Carver was no one in particular. She had always been someone, of course. The world had simply taken a long time to catch up.